It was only the other day that someone said, "I'll keep this guy here because, he gets along really well with the kids and he obviously cares," and I don't think a bigger accolade can be paid to a teacher.
It will cost council about $25,000 in lost revenue, but for CBD businesses trying to compete with suburban shopping centres, free parking on Saturdays could be priceless. Council began reviewing 7-day metered parking way back in February 2006.
If it's going to help business, then and the city centre in general, well, that's an option that we've got to look at.
The current council is finally expected to approve a 6-month trial tomorrow night. Some meters have already been changed to provide free parking on weekends. The Foreshore and Honeysuckle will be excluded.
I think it'll be a fantastic thing, especially for the businesses that operate in town.
The business community has told us for a long time that parking meters is a real sort of killer on their business activity.
But the push to introduce more metered parking in suburbs remains.
Personally, I think it's a very poor thing for us to move down that road. You just have to look at the CBD and how bad the CBD has been operating with paid parking. To export that idea to the suburbs is terrible.
Meanwhile, Bar Beach residents have taken part in a workshop to suggest improvements for the area, including shade shelters and after-hours gates on the beach car park. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
The Salvation Army Centre in Newcastle used to sort more than 20,000 garments each week. Now it's lucky to get 9,000. Some of the decrease is being attributed to the tough financial times, but according to the charity, that's not the only reason.
There's an extra competitor out there that has been taking donations and recycling them themselves, which has cost us quite a few donations.
That competitor is Life Cycle, a service run by Lake Macquarie, Cessnock and Maitland councils. Residents place donations in a curbside recycling bin for pickup 3 times a year. The clothes are then sorted and sold to participating charities at a nominal fee.
At present, we have a very low participation rate of just 4.6% of all homes that participate in the service. So any impact that we would have on any charities, bearing in mind there are 7 major charities operating here in the Hunter, would be minuscule.
Lifecycle maintains it doesn't profit off the service, rather it's just easing some of the charity's workload and stopping waste heading to landfill. But the Salvation Army chose not to be a part of it.
They're goods that we would otherwise be entitled to, and our screening purposes, we'd never know what we get.
Lifecycle claims some of the donations the Salvation Army would normally receive are probably ending up in these blue bins run by a private operator from Sydney. Amid reports, some people are mistaking them as charity drop-offs. Kate Mitchell, NBN News.
While the global economy remains in strife, Beresfield-based business Quarry Mining and Construction Equipment is ploughing ahead in leaps and bounds. The company, which is a finalist in the Hunter's Fastest Growing Awards, manufactures drilling equipment to stabilise underground coal mines and road tunnels.
The business was set up in 1983 by my father. And I guess in the last 3-4 years we've seen a huge growth and a huge change, mainly in the Hunter Valley, but we also have offices in Brisbane and Mackay now.
In the last 3 years, turnover has tripled and staff numbers have jumped from 3 to 12. It's now extracting millions of dollars from companies such as Xstrata, Centennial Coal and Thiess, and is capitalising on the economic downturn as buyers search for better prices.
The so-called economic crisis has probably seen the squeeze, put some pressure on them to look for an alternate supplier.
Capital Homes, a previous winner, is another finalist.
It's been just full-on growth. It hasn't stopped at all. It's been just like a roller coaster.
Established in Maitland in 1996, its focus is on building multi-unit developments across the state.
We set up the company in Maitland purely because it's in the heart of the growth area.
The winners will be announced at West's tonight. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
Playing with her young sons Jonah and Will, Cassie Pitkin is at her happiest, enjoying the family she feared she'd never have. At 25, Cassie has embarked on a bright new phase in life. She's recovered from an eating disorder which began at the age of 12 while she was making the transition from primary to high school.
I had this idea that if I was really disciplined with myself, I would be able to achieve more. And that sort of went into other areas with eating and exercising. And it basically started as something really minor. And then before I knew it, I had a voice in my head that was telling me what to do.
A roller coaster ride with anorexia began with terrible effect.
It was a massive toll where I'd get really depressed and not want to be social anymore when I am a really social person. And my eating was completely affected and I was losing a lot of weight and getting quite sick.
Psychologist Stella Dyer says eating disorders are becoming more common.
There's a huge amount of pressures that families are facing, and that trickles down to the kids. They tend to absorb their parents' worries.
It took Cassie many years to feel comfortable with food and with herself.
It's really important to recognise it as a mental illness. It's not something they've chosen. It's not something that they can just suddenly change.
In moments when I would be aware that I had an issue, I would start to think that the things I wanted in my life I wasn't going to be able to have, such as having a family.
With support from health professionals and her family, Cassie regained control of her life to emerge happy and healthy.
If I didn't take the step to recovery, I wouldn't be a mum with 2 beautiful boys, and I wouldn't be studying, and I wouldn't be running a volunteer group trying to help other people with eating disorders seek help.
A counsellor and advocate, Cassie has come full circle, an inspiration to others facing mental illness.
Never before had the fortunes of a company had so much influence over an Australian city. Following World War I, the demand for large-scale iron and steel production saw Broken Hill Propriety, or BHP, move itself into steelmaking. Newcastle was chosen as the birthplace thanks to its good harbour, ready labour and proximity to the Hunter Valley. The Newcastle Steelworks opened on the 2nd of June 1915, and it wasn't long before BHP formed a foundation for the growth of our young nation. Soon the government ordered more than 66,000 rails for the expansion and modernisation of the national railway system. In 1932, BHP delivered more than 10,000 tonnes of steel for the construction of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. By the end of the 1930s, the Newcastle plant was the largest integrated steelworks in the British Empire. During its lifetime, BHP was often referred to as a city within a city, and it's easy to understand why. At its peak in 1964, the plant employed almost 12,000 people. That's more than enough to fill the Eastern Grandstand here at Energy Australia Stadium with people to spare. But the 1980s signalled the beginning of the end, as a worldwide recession saw demand for steel plummet. By the late 90s, Newcastle had become a relatively small operation by global standards. Then in 1997, the worst fears were realised, as BHP formally announced the closure of the steelworks to be completed by 1999.
A part of Newcastle died today. BHP's blueprint for the 21st century, severing the city's 80-year link to steelmaking.
Well, it's a sad day. I mean, they've reached into the hearts of the town and they've ripped them out.
Despite protests by workers and the union, BHP management refused to reverse their decision. The final months didn't pass without incident, as the ageing plant continued to deteriorate.
A routine maintenance check at the Steelworks wharf went horribly wrong just after 8 o'clock this morning.
That nobody was badly injured or even killed in the explosion is a minor miracle. Around 9:30, a boiler in BHP's powerhouse blew up, shaking inner city Newcastle.
Ian Clark's foreman found him lying on the ground, suffering head, chest and abdominal wounds. He was operated on at John Hunter Hospital but did not survive.
Over 84 years, more than 50,000 people earned their living at BHP, but on September 30th, 1999, it was time for the last whistle.
It's a bad day. It's a bad day. But, well, that's the end of it.
To me, it's a breakup of a pretty large family.
Tomorrow night, what did the future hold for BHP workers?
You didn't have to be a mind reader to work out how Branko Kalina was feeling post-game.
We gifted them the win. There was only one team there that really deserved to win that game. I don't care what their coach says. And the fact that he's on 500,000, I'm on $50 or whatever it is, if that's what the foreigners are going to bring to this game, you'll love this. Let's have more of local coaches.
Despite the swipe at Sydney, he saved some for his own side too.
I don't accept it. And if I accept it and the players accept that, then we'll keep dishing it out every week.
Given the raft of chances Newcastle missed against Sydney, you could understand his frustration. The Jets had enough opportunities to win the game, let alone draw. And the captain will make some calls of his own at training this week.
I think we have to sit down amongst the boys, amongst the players and talk through ourselves, because at the moment it just seems like that we're a little bit distant from each other.
Even the mistakes that were made, they weren't made by kids. They were made by people who should know better.
Medical scans tomorrow will reveal the state of Sasho Petrovski's knee, but the man himself reckons he could yet play on Friday against Perth.
Yeah, look, I feel good. You know, when it happened, I continued on playing for another, probably 60-odd minutes.
Meanwhile, Englishman and former Sydney FC player Michael Bridges will be among several triallists with the team this week. Jim Callanan, NBN News.
The RTA acquired the land known as Mountain Park from Forestry New South Wales more than 3 weeks ago. Some of its traditional owners, including Warramai and Cynthia Date, had been camping in the area to protect it. They say they didn't receive an eviction notice until yesterday morning, just hours before police moved in. Today, the group was given 3 hours to pack up and move, but was shifted before it had the chance.
I was instructed by the RTA that the Dates family were not welcome on the land, and could we please leave now, and they will organise all the equipment to be taken to the local police station.
I feel very intimidated. I feel really it takes away my Aboriginality. It takes away my right to protect the land, protect the trees, protect the earth.
Last week, the Kurua Aboriginal Land Council agreed that 2 parcels of land in the proposed path of the bypass were not culturally significant. Shortly before that, Environment Minister Peter Garrett ruled that while the top of the mountain was significant to the Warramai people, the bottom wasn't.
The old mountain is sacred, not just the top.
The RTA says it's worked to minimise any impact the bypass has on Aboriginal culture and believes it's supported by most of the Indigenous and wider community. Lauren Bladwell, NBN News.
It was an inhospitable day on Lake Macquarie, but beneath the surface, work is underway to make the Swansea Channel more accommodating for boat users. Dredging has started on its worst affected parts, where siltation has left the depth at barely more than a metre at high tide. The spoil is being unloaded onto the shore at Swan Bay, where it'll be used to improve the beach. The state government is paying $300,000 for the latest work, but recently asked Lake Macquarie City Council for $160,000 to extend the project. Mayor Greg Piper says with all the money the state gets from boating and fishing licences and boat mooring and registration fees, it should pay the full amount to keep the channel passable. The council agreed last night to contribute $80,000. Meanwhile, people can have their say on a plan of management for the Belmont Wetlands State Park. The land on the eastern side of the Pacific Highway is earmarked for a range of uses, from walking trails to tourist accommodation, events and a nursery.
Aaron Blinman is a very special young boy. He can't walk, talk and eat, or even sleep for more than a few minutes, but there's no doubting the love he has for his family. Last year, his parents decided that they couldn't give Aaron the 24-hour care he needs, while also looking after 9-year-old Kayla, who has cerebral palsy, 7-year-old Chloe and baby Kella.
We could no longer do it anymore. It was too stressful on our family. Our family was breaking down.
Aaron originally moved in with a host family, but because he doesn't sleep, the family was unable to cope. He was then placed in a respite house in Toronto, a move the Department of Ageing, Disability and Home Care, or DADIC, said was temporary. But 5 months on, he's still there.
At the moment he's stuck. He's sitting in a respite house that has adult respite clients coming and going all the time, and we don't know what's going to happen with him.
The Blinmans want Aaron to live in a children's group home, but say DADIC won't consider it because it's against government policy. What's more, DADIC won't say how long Aaron will be forced to live at the transient respite house.
They keep telling us there is nothing
out there for him.
Bar host family care. We find that very frustrating because we have done host family care and it has been unsuccessful.
For now, all the Blinmans can do is wait for their little boy to have a permanent home. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
Macular degeneration is where the most visually sensitive part of the back of the eye begins to break down, reducing and distorting the image signals sent to the brain. It will get worse over time, but can be reversed or at least arrested, and early detection is paramount.
The test is simple, it's painless, it takes 15 minutes. Every patient should be having it done. Early detection is the key.
It's just a case of magnifying and photographing the retina and checking the evenness of the slightly darkened area. Dark blotches mean wet macular degeneration and white areas indicate dry degeneration. But now both can be treated.
There's been some injections of certain chemicals that can actually not only stop vision being lost, can actually improve vision. With the dry form of macular degeneration, certain supplements and lifestyle choices can stop it worsening over time.
A survey shows that awareness of the disease has improved by 50% over the past 2 years, but optometrists want everyone over 50 to join the campaign.
The demolition of the BHP site began shortly after the last whistle. Removing the steelworks became the biggest industrial demolition in Australian history. There was always an inherent danger working at the plant, and it was a similar story during its removal.
Late this morning, the job claimed its first life as a 5-man team prepared to bring down a 3-storey building.
But for the majority of former employees, the term BHP conjures up fond memories. Aubrey Brooks was given the honour of shutting down for the last time. 10 years on, his passion for preserving history still burns.
My grandfather started on that site in 1915. He worked there for 52 years. My father worked there for 42 and I worked there for 38, from start to finish.
Happily retired, Orb often visits the BHP monument known as the Muster Point to reminisce about his working life. Eventually, he was nicknamed Honest Orb, always happy to speak his mind in support of his fellow workers.
There was a lot of blokes fought real hard to try and keep the place going, you know, but with a stroke of a pen, mate, gone. That's history.
Inside the Muster Point, workers are quoted about life after BHP. One simply reads, "I'm going to go fishing," but not everyone eased into a comfortable retirement. From beekeepers to dive instructors and the creator of a website for Silverchair, the workers proved to be a resilient bunch.
A select number of employees managed to transfer their skills to the teaching profession thanks to a program called Pathways, started here at the University of Newcastle, when academics approached BHP about retraining their workers.
The university became quite famous in a sense for it. It was written up in a lot of articles at the time.
Despite some reservations in academic circles, Professor Terence Lovett says the workers proved to be a valuable asset.
On average, they did better academically. They did better when they went out into the schools on practicum.
But on top of redundancy packages, the cost of retraining proved to be incredibly expensive.
It was an exceptional kind of a deal and not something that was likely to be repeatable.
Tomorrow night, how have Newcastle and the Hunter changed since 1999?
"11-and-a-half-year-old Chelsea is one of Beyoncé's biggest fans, but she never could have imagined this.
It was amazing. It was breathtaking actually, all the way back from the Ronald McDonald House. I couldn't say a word because it was just breathless.
There was barely a dry eye in the packed Acer Arena as the pair shared a once-in-a-lifetime moment.
I don't know how she picked me out of the crowd. It was just like nothing else mattered in the world. It was just me there with Beyonce.
Since the clip hit YouTube, Chelsea has become an overnight smash hit. Today she was back in Newcastle, appearing on hospital TV, signing autographs and even giving her own Beyonce tribute show. Chelsea has battled cancer since she was 4.5, but is now in remission.
Oh, I was gobsmacked. It's the first time I let her out on her own, and all this publicity happens now, but no, Beyonce's got to be a beautiful woman to do what she did and not know anything about Chelsea's situation and how sick Chelsea really is.
Paul Lobb, NBN News.
As volleyballers, the Jets make fantastic footballers. But it's another code that's caught their eye. Rugby League's Parramatta Eels have revealed the secrets behind their amazing form reversal, and the Jets coach was quick to show his own players as they look to end a mini slump of their own.
They had a slow start to the season and had a few problems, and they as a group decided that if they want to succeed and win, they have to do certain things.
It's a point not lost on Tarek Elridge, who's a lifelong Eels fan.
It just goes to show when you play together as a team, if you've got belief, anything can happen.
Cleared to play overnight after his red card and automatic suspension from the weekend were both overturned. For Elridge, Friday's match means plenty.
It's a special occasion this week, Matt Thompson's 100th game, so just I've been here from day one with Matt, and I watched him growing up, and he's something I'm looking forward to.
Kalina, meanwhile, has apologised for a post-match outburst on Sunday, aimed in part at his Sydney FC counterpart.
I was wrong. I was out of order. Having said that, if I didn't say it then, I don't think it would ever have created the interest that it did.
Donny de Groot is due back this weekend, while it's hoped Melbourne's Denny Vasilevski can remain on a short-term contract. The coach has asked fans not to be too harsh on their marquee man, Fabio Vignaroli, after some mixed performances.
Fabio will get better as the team gets better because he's a quality player.
Jim Callanan, NBN News.
It's our world in sepia tone. cars, boats, streets all shrouded in thick dust, reducing visibility to just a few hundred metres. While some sports were cancelled, other teams struggled on, like this junior cricket match at Lismore, where it must have been difficult just seeing the ball. Some used face masks to protect themselves, this man improvising with a tea towel. But for the elderly and those with respiratory illnesses, it posed a real danger. The Northern Operations Centre for the Ambulance Service was inundated with hundreds of calls.
People with asthma and long-term respiratory conditions are finding it very difficult to breathe under the conditions, and we're advising them to stay inside.
In Sydney, the commute to work was chaotic. Ferries were delayed, the Harbour Bridge barely visible in the tangerine tone. Parliament House in Canberra was also blanketed in dust.
Looked outside and it was red, and it was kind of freaky, so I almost fell off my chair.
I've seen it foggy before, but I've never actually seen the whole place glowing yellow.
While some planes were grounded, others still took off, like this flight in Coffs Harbour where the haze blanketed the airport. The rare storm, which has swept across New South Wales and southern Queensland, has stripped valuable topsoil from inland farms, carried by gale force winds of up to 100 kilometres an hour. According to NBN weatherman Gavin Morris, the dust particle count is 10 times more than anything on record.
When a particle count in the atmosphere reaches 200, it's considered to be high or dangerous for asthma sufferers especially. Today's particle count went beyond 2,600 parts per million.
The amber haze didn't worry those in the surf today, and it's certainly not a worry for car wash owners who'll be in demand tomorrow. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
Newcastle's morning peak has never quite looked like this. With visibility restricted, cars crawled through the city.
It's crazy. I was driving here this morning and it was just, I couldn't even see.
Commuters did what they could to protect themselves. Schools were open, but student numbers were down. At 9:30, with the sun still rising, the city settled into an early twilight.
This has gone from red and orange to grey.
I grew up in the bush, so I'm used to dust storms, but this is quite interesting.
This time-lapse sequence shows the storm's movement across Newcastle from midday to late this afternoon.
Well, it's pretty dramatic. We're from New Zealand, so we've never seen anything like it.
Layman Street was closed to traffic.
We're concerned that the trees are vulnerable during gale force winds, and so we've closed the road as a precautionary measure.
And wind gusts were recorded up around 100 kilometres an hour, causing more than one tree to fall. The harbour was closed to shipping as thick dust made it impossible to see from one side to the other. Newcastle Airport was shut this morning, its terminal clogged with passengers. Flights either delayed or cancelled as planes remained grounded and pilots already in the air stayed there.
Pilots earlier did come and have a look, and they circled to see whether it was going to move a little bit. However, they took the decision that they would divert their aircraft elsewhere.
But the dust didn't just cause visual problems. Newcastle paramedics were swamped with 250 calls this morning alone.
Statewide, we've had a dramatic increase in the number of calls to breathing problems.
While the New South Wales Fire Brigade's communication centre was frantic.
We've had a very busy morning. We've attended over 200 incidents since 5 o'clock this morning. Majority have been automatic fire alarms operating because of the dust getting into smoke alarms.
This is the biggest cordless drill in the business. Costing a shade over $2 million, the Pit Viper rotary blast hole rig gives plenty of bang for your buck getting to coal which is close to the surface.
We drill a major amount of holes and then they load it full of explosives and blast it, and that gives you fragmentation for processing.
It's the largest of thousands of items on display at the Mining and Energy Expo. Check out this sucker, a giant vacuum cleaner to hoover up dust from cement, coal and iron ore. Could you clean up this dust storm we're having today?
This is a bit of a problem. There's quite a lot of it, but I think that's something I've been asked 20 times over today.
This monster off-road truck will get you around any work site with its independent half axles.
You never get a situation where you've got a hang-up where the wheel is dangling, not being on contact to the ground.
And thermal imaging cameras are now being used for preventative maintenance in mechanical and electrical equipment.
So the nice thing is you can see things actually increasing in time and in temperature, and before they're getting too hot, you know, for example, hey, this particular component is about to break down.
The expo at Muswellbrook Showground wraps up tomorrow. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
Paris, Milan, New York? No, it's our very own Newcastle. With skyscraper-sized stilettos and the latest designer labels, models were being primped and preened backstage before the first big show of Newcastle Fashion Week. The event is the brainchild of student and cancer survivor Louise McKay, who has the support of 250 volunteers.
I've probably been working on it for about a year now, and I've had a committee working on everything since March, so it's been a long-running event.
Today, local up-and-coming designers and fashion houses were showing their latest collections on the 25-metre-long catwalk, including everything from 1950s-inspired pieces to dramatic evening gowns.
We've got so many great boutiques, so many great designers, and they just need to be exposed a bit more.
The Festival of Fashion continues until Friday night, with afternoon and evening parades at the store.
We've got High Tea with Mrs. Wu on Friday night. They're our headlining designer. They've been shown across the world, so they're internationally known, so it's very exciting to have them on board.
The inaugural event is raising money for the Cancer Council. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
Shortly before BHP closed, well-known Novocastrian Dean Perry returned to Newcastle to immortalise the plant as part of his film Bootmen.
Dean's very proud of where he comes from, and there was never any doubt in his mind that we would shoot it here as much as we could afford.
As steelmaking was consigned to the pages of history, the recently elected Lord Mayor of Newcastle faced the prospect of leading a city with an uncertain future.
I was there on the day the gate was shut, and I looked at the faces of the men and women walking out, the 1,900 of them, and there was a huge amount of respect and optimism in their face, in their eyes, and I felt comfortable. I drew strength from them.
Robin McDonald worked at the Hunter Valley Research Foundation before and after the closure.
At the time, we did try to assure people that it wouldn't be as bad as possibly they thought it would be, but still they were nervous.
Speaking to NBN before her untimely death in August this year, Miss McDonald believed the Hunter's economy was already diversifying throughout the 90s and was well placed to lose the big Australian. As the coal industry boomed, the closure of companies such as Pasminco, National Textiles and more recently Pacific Brands saw more people visiting Centrelink. But the growth of service industries, particularly education and health, helped to soften the blow.
I mean, these people have been given $100 million by the Hawke and Keating government to make the industry sustainable, which they then turn around, in my opinion, use for redundancies, which was just ridiculous. So I disagree with the fact that they've gone. Now that they have gone and it's 10 years on, we're in a much better position for the future without that industry.
The region's economy may have changed, but what about the city's image? Outside the Hunter, is Newcastle still seen as a dirty and polluted steel city? A recent article in the New York Times about emissions trading used this photo to represent Newcastle. The story opens with,
"On the windswept streets of Newcastle, the world's largest coal port and a hub of Australian heavy industry."
And later adds,
Meanwhile, among the smokestacks and coal loaders off Newcastle.
Hunter Tourism CEO Sheridan Ferrier says the piece contains imagery that is almost extinct. These days, our beaches, Lake Macquarie and the wineries represent the region. And like other industries, tourism has stepped in to fill the void left by BHP.
Tourism is valued at around $1.3 billion to our local economy. It employs about 25,000 people, and that number is growing. And you know, the number of tourism products that we have here has certainly doubled or even tripled in the last 10 years.
Tomorrow night, would BHP's closure be the death of nearby suburbs?
We thought house prices were actually going to tumble and Newcastle was going to die.
Future Fund wants to be the state's top dog. The 4-year-old trained in Aberdeen, traditional thoroughbred country, will compete in this year's New South Wales Country Challenge. The event launched at the Gardens this morning in true greyhound style with a match race. The Country Challenge is the biggest event of its kind in Australia, run on non-TAB tracks right across the state.
27 tracks involved, 300 to 400 dogs will compete through the series throughout the year, and it's really significant in terms of the amount of economic activity that it generates.
It is a challenge. It's a hard slog. It's very rewarding if you can win, and it's a big thrill to win.
$170,000 in prize money is up for grabs this year, but overall the sport is starting to rake in the big money.
We're going through a resurgence in terms of popularity as a code where people can get involved quite easily and quite inexpensively in terms of participation, but also as a wagering product we're experiencing significant growth.
In fact, prize money has increased by $5.1 million over the last 6 months alone. Kate Mitchell, NBN News.
There's no way I'd be here without him. Like last year I had no results, and just since he's taken me under his wing I've been going pretty good.
It's a good week to have a share in a car wash. Owners of dirty vehicles have been queuing all day to get busy with the suds before all that dirt bakes onto the paintwork in the sun. It might take you a while to get into a car wash this weekend, but it's probably worthwhile you do. The experts say if you don't get all the dirt off, it could damage the paint.
Getting the dust off will reduce any chance of scratching, so the first thing, you should put a lot of water on the car, hose as much dust off as you can, and then either get to your car with a sponge or chamois and then sponge all the dirt off.
If you think washing your own car is a chore, spare a thought for Graham Johansson, who had to wash 70 vehicles in this car yard today.
Keeps me in a job, so yeah, it is a good side, I suppose.
The backyard pool is off limits according to experts who say the phosphates and minerals from the dust can grow algae.
It could go green if they don't use something like a starver, because the chlorine that's already in the water will be chewed up by the phosphates that could be in the dust and the dirt that flew in yesterday. So that needs to be treated so that they can have their chlorine still do its job.
Washing the dust off the house and outdoor furniture is a good idea as well. And don't forget the pets who were outside during the storm yesterday. Bosley the Labrador was back to his black self today after turning red in all that dust. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
Dorothy Turnbull was sitting in her kitchen when winds gusting up to 150 kilometres an hour blew the roof clean off her home.
Just like a bomb going off, I suppose. I don't know. It was just cracking. It just went.
The gale force gusts hurled the tin sheets into a tree, yard and nearby paddock. Instead of panicking, Mrs Turnbull promptly called the SES and her son-in-law for help.
It was frightening, but I suppose I've probably been through a lot in my life, and I've managed to be strong enough to do what I thought was right.
The 79-year-old has lived here for more than 30 years.
We've had a lot of wind here over the years, but nothing like it was yesterday.
Mrs Turnbull desperately wants her home repaired, but knows there's a good chance it may have to be knocked down and rebuilt.
We've rung the insurance company and they've got to get back to us, so I don't really know at this stage. I'm staying at my daughter's for the time being.
Planned for bushland near Blackwell's Park, the Olstan mine would technically have been an underground operation, but for many locals, all too similar to open cut. Ultimately, the company shelved its plans, saying the mine wasn't feasible. Greg Piper wants to make sure that's the end of it.
It's not necessarily about Centennial coal, it's about coal availability and who might want to do this into the future. It's inappropriate in Lake Macquarie.
He's set to introduce a private members bill which, if passed, would prohibit all but underground mining in the area. Meantime, Mr Piper's campaign for better health services for the booming South Lake region is gaining momentum with the release of a report.
We are really talking about a hospital type facility, but without the acute emergency care, we don't believe that could be justified. But we do believe there's a lot of subacute care that could be provided.
The document by the South Lake Integrated Healthcare Committee will be used to lobby the state government.
The prospect of having to pay $450 to fill up an average size car is probably something that should weigh on the minds of the planners in this city.
The American ship Alpina was caught in a southerly gale off Stockton Bight in September 1909. Efforts to tow her had failed and her anchors were dragging. The decision was taken to rescue the 16 souls on board, which included the captain's wife of just 3 weeks. The rescue was up to the 14 crew of the lifeboat Victoria, which had been towed out to the scene by the pilot cutter Ajax.
One single crew were out there for 15 gruelling hours at sea, and seas like the Pasha-Bolka. Imagine being out there in that. They survived and they saved those men.
Tragedy almost struck when the Victoria with 30 people on board capsized. Actor Barry Shepherd has been studying the role of lifeboat coxswain Antonio Costa.
Everybody, the crew and my crew, all but 3, got washed into the water, including myself.
The rescue will be remembered at the Maritime Centre at midday on Sunday.
In the days and weeks after BHP closed, the difference was clear. There was an almost immediate change in the air.
Initial results we've got from our monitoring stations are encouraging, going in the right direction, and I guess the response we're getting from the community is also that there's some improvements out there.
For residents in nearby suburbs such as Mayfield and Tyers Hill, life would never be the same.
Can't say anything else. It really was a dirty suburb. It's always been a pleasant place to live, apart from that.
Employees at other businesses were also breathing easy.
We joke about it a lot now, but we definitely had to wash the car at least once a week. You constantly had sort of that fine dust on absolutely everything.
But with the big Australian moving out, there was a genuine fear of a mass exodus of residents.
I know within the real estate industry itself, we were all quite concerned. We thought house prices were actually going to tumble and Newcastle was going to die. But the reality is, within a short period of time, prices were on the increase.
At the time, Mayfield was seen as a cheap alternative. Even former BHP workers took advantage of the housing boom by making money renovating houses. These days, the suburbs have caught up with the rest of Newcastle.
Once upon a time, it was basically first home buyers or investors. These days, it tends to be second, third and even fourth home buyers as well. But I guess the common element with a lot of these properties is they all have character, and there's still a few of them that need to be renovated.
Other businesses that started at BHP, such as Hunter United Credit Union and NIB, continued to grow after 1999. Over the past decade, the site they once called home has been the subject of a lot of talk, but very little action.
The really sad part of over there, it's 10 years have passed now. Every morning the whistle used to blow for blokes to start to work. Nothing's been built on the site. There's absolutely nothing here. I'm very disappointed in the Labor government.
Several ideas have been floated for the site, including a theme park, the world's largest water recycling plant, as well as a casino to be housed here at BHP's grand former headquarters. But ask the business community and there's only ever been one suitable option.
The New South Wales government has a very strategic plan for the development of a container terminal on the former BHP site. It's all linked to what's happening in Sydney and what's happening in Port Kembla.
Tomorrow night, what does the future hold for Newcastle and the former home of BHP?
These sorts of things, once they're built, they operate then basically forever. So let's get the decision right and then we can move forward from that point.
Matt Thompson is the sort of bloke you want on your team. He's only missed one game for the Jets since debuting with the club back in 2005. An A-League crown and the captaincy have followed, not to mention a memorable hat-trick against Melbourne.
That's obviously a nice thing to do, and I wouldn't mind putting one away on my 100th game. It'd be great, make it a bit more special again.
Red Wednesday left the Jets grounded, forcing them to hit the training park for the first time this week, only a day before their next game.
That's the situation we're in, so what can you do about it? But I don't think the players mind. I think Tom has enjoyed the break.
For once at least, the coach doesn't have to worry about player numbers. An injured Sasho Petrosky is still a chance to play, and fellow striker Donny de Groot looks the goods. Then there's Danny Vasilevsky, who's signed a short-term deal to help the club cover its missing rep players.
I've got a headache tomorrow, to be honest with you, picking the squad, because we've actually got a few extra players.
Colin Baldwin, NBN News. He's the Australian Cruiserweight champion and boasts an impressive record of only 2 losses from 17 fights, so you can't blame Daniel Aman for thinking global.
I've done pretty much everything I can in Australia, and I just want to have a crack over there.
That first shot comes in early October when he's on the undercard of a Kiwi heavyweight blockbuster billed as nothing less than the fight of the century. The hype guarantees TV coverage and a big overseas audience. Now it's up to Aman to show what he's got against Kiwi Lawrence Tuasa, a man he describes as a benchmark for his division.
I always thought we'd fight each other one day over 12 rounds. It's a little bit disappointing. That's only a 6-round fight, but it's on a big show and it's a great opportunity.
6 rounds or not, Aman is risking his belt and his reputation, and you can only hope that he has more luck this time around than in his last big televised bout against Jamie Witters. That ended in less than a minute when Witters resorted to using an elbow. Aman still bears the physical scars from that encounter, but it didn't dent his sense of humour.
Nah, mate, I've got a head that needs regular panel beating.
Colin Baldwin, NBN News.